going on stage and not feeling any pain was a part of this magic that I was talking about. And but the thing that didn't occur to me is that that should have been a message to me, is to gain confidence. But every time I went on stage, it was like, is it going to happen? You know, that was kind of in my mind. Is it going to happen? Am I going to get dizzy, you know, or have so much pain I can't finish the performance? And so it just loomed up and loomed up and loomed up and became a nightmare. And it was like, here I am enjoying all of this activity on the stage, but yet that preparation time, is it going to happen? It was going to happen. And that was a tough thing to deal with. And each time when I come off stage, it was like, whoa, I made it again. I made it again. So that is the first part of the magic of being on stage. And then I could, you know, there are other magic moments, but I'll stop here and let you jump in.
Well, I just, you know, you had that first one, but you've had a long career. So are there other experiences that really stood out for you?
That's a very good question, because I had mentioned before how, you know, coming from Mississippi and how I eventually ended up in the post office, which was my third job and my biggest paying job, $2 an hour at the time, 1957. And then I had to adjust this entirely new environment. I mean, you know, like coming from Mississippi, where we had a strictly, you know, restricted and segregated society, and to go into the post office where there was this sea of of white faces, you know, and then sitting next to people who you could talk to, which I had never, you know, experienced that in my life. And so I had mentioned about how some of the guys would just bring up race to me, and then they, you know, they would, some of it was funny and kind of negative and that kind of a thing. But it wasn't all negative in the post office. Sometimes, you know, there was some people would bring up race, and it was a pleasant conversation, and there was nothing negative said in it. But that stuck in my mind, how, you know, here I am now communicating with other people, and yet, you know, it seemed like the communication wasn't going too smoothly. And that stayed with me, why people have a difficult time talking to one another. And so my first play, 1969, it was a similar situation to the post office. And I went into it, and everybody was sitting in the audience, all of the actors, you know, just see it. And here I walk in, you know, this one black guy. And it was like a two-part audition. The first guy was like weeding people out to decide who he wanted the director to see. They flew in a director from Hollywood. But anyway, here I walked in, and I was, of course, extremely nervous. I mean, without a doubt, it was like I felt petrified. And I got through the first audition, and then they called me back for the second audition. And then I got cast in the play. I said, whoa, wow. You know, somebody from Hollywood, you know, has cast me in a play. This is a good way to get a running start. And then when the cast assembled, it was a big cast in the play. I think something like 15 or 20 people, and I was the only I was the black guy, odd person out. And I'm very, you know, I'm keenly observant of my surroundings, and I noticed this one guy who was a tad bit older than the other people. There was a few older guys than me, but this one guy, I noticed he seemed to have sort of never got in anywhere close to my space. And that caught my attention. I said, I think he's a little uncomfortable around me. So, would you believe it, out of the clear blue, he just walked up to me about a week into the rehearsal, or maybe 2 weeks into the rehearsal, and says, Danny, I'm prejudiced. Just like that. He said, if I had met you walking down the street, I would be afraid of you. He says, but now I know you, and I like you, and walked away, and never said, you know, anything to me again on that subject. But I liked him. And we did 2 plays. And I liked that guy. And I thought about it, why do I like him so much? And I finally figured it out. I like him because out of all those conversations that I had in the post office, he was a man who approached me with the idea, I'm an honest man. I'm honest with myself. I realize that if I had met this young man in a different situation, I would have been afraid of him. But I'm not afraid of him now. I know him and I like him, and I want to tell him that. To me, that is real communication. And that's what I liked about him. He was willing to have a real conversation with me about people. And that was the first highlight. That was off stage. And the second one was in the same play. It was a break in the rehearsal. And this lady was sitting next to me. And we were sort of partners in the play. Most of our scenes, we were sitting together. And so we had a break. And then she says, without even looking, she says, Danny, you should read Stanislavski. And that struck me, Stanislavski. So I went and got the book, Konstantin Stanislavski, An Actor Prepares. And I opened it up and I says, oh my God, this is tough stuff. This is not easy to digest. So I find myself reading that book over and over and over and over. And it was filled with notes to myself, and the book started falling apart. And then finally the book fell completely apart. And I was in Philadelphia one time visiting my brother, and he's a collector of books. His books stacked all up on his stairwell, and he stops at book fairs where you can get books for $0.25, and he would come in and say, Danny, here's a book on speech. You like this? It only cost me $0.25. I says, yeah, I like that. And he'd come in another day. Here's another book on speech. Do you like this? Yeah, I like that. It only cost me $0.25. Then he comes in one day and says, here's the one on acting. It says, An Actor Prepares. I says, I do have that. I says, but it's just falling apart. It's just completely apart. He said, oh, well, then you can use it. So I started reading his book. And that book I still have, actually. I had it now about 20 years, I guess. And it's full of notes to myself, and I'm taping it up. And I will probably soon have to go and buy a new An Actor Prepares. It's a book that you can read over and over and over again. So that was the 2 first highlights in my theater career, was having this actor to come up to me and have that brief conversation with me about how he, basically was afraid, in essence, of black people. But I'm not afraid of you because now I know you. I thought that was very significant. And then the Stanislavski thing was kind of defining my career from then on, because, it's some really deep stuff about how to get yourself prepared to do a role. And it's great stuff, yeah.
So, in this period, are there any favorite plays?
I think I've been in about 60 plays. And of all those plays, it's 2 plays that keep coming back to me. It's the 2 plays I feel I could do them over and over again. The first one is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And the second one is The Piano Lesson by August Wilson. Now, I've done the piano lesson over a period of years, over 300 times. And I've done Of Mice and Men 4 times, first in community theater, and then, not 3, I've done it 3 times. First in community theater, and then twice in a professional setting. And my most satisfying time that I did Of Mice and Men was in community theater. My favorite director, the one who had directed me I met him at the Theater in the Round in Minneapolis, Warren Frost. And he also directed me in Of Mice and Men. And I was struck by this character, Crooks. And the one thing that he said to me back in community theater stuck with me. He said, when the big guy comes in, you start fussing at him, but you actually, underneath your subtext is, you want company. And you're glad to have company. And so I realized, oh wow, this is a very powerful statement this director is saying to me. He was saying to me, there's a text and there's a subtext. And sometimes when you are saying the lines, if you understand the subtext, the message is not only more powerful, it's clearer to the audience, and the story has more impact. And my thing was, you know, this is a role I should continue to go back to and study because there's a lot in this role. And that's what I've been doing since I did that role in community theater years ago. I would love to do that role. Right now, I would love to direct that play because in studying that role, Crooks, I in turn studied the entire play. And I've studied all of the characters and what the ensemble quality of this play, the essence of George's relationship with Lenny and Crooks' relationship with Lenny and the people who come into his room during that one scene. And that is, to me, is one of the most, that's an American classic. John Steinbeck wrote an American classic. And I'd like to say, expand on that. And I'll tell you why. Because in studying this role, Crooks, I realized one of the, I've got to get the right word for this. One of the things that great writers, great playwrights have in common is that they work, they send powerful messages through, for instance, like, I'll give you an example, the message of stereotyping. That's a commonly, hear that word all the time. He's being stereotyped. And nobody wants to be stereotyped because it's a form of judgment, of categorizing people. And I realized in studying Crooks that this is what Steinbeck is saying. He said, well, I'm going to take all the stereotypes about black people, and in this one man, I'm going to tear all of them down. And the thing that gets me is that I've seen this show done, and I don't see that message coming across. And I believe that message can be brought across if everybody understands all of those elements of that character. And it's all there. I could point it out to you. Okay, number one, the guy is crippled. He has, they call it a busted back. Well, I can identify with that. I'm permanently injured. I was, permanently injured in my neck when I was 8 years old. I've been injured all of my life, so I've had to deal with that. It's a tremendous handicap to deal with constant pain all the time and get tired and that kind of a thing. So I could identify with Crooks having a busted back. That's one element there. He's got the busted back, but he's very athletic. Now that's a stereotype that is said, oh yeah, they are very athletic. They have natural abilities. Those black people, they are very good in sports. They can jump high. All of those things you hear that's said. Well, in Steinbeck's play, Crooks, with the busted back, nobody can beat him pitching horseshoes. And yet, he pitched horseshoes with him, but at the end of the day, he's not allowed to sleep with them. And he feels the pain of the people that he's associated with in the daytime. He has to, and they have him in the corner of the barn. He sleeps in the corner of the barn with the horses. Steinbeck did a very powerful thing in this play. Okay, when Crooks' scene opens, he's reading a book. And I feel that what's missing in the plays that I've seen is they have a small stack of books on his shelf. To me, that's an error. That's a huge error. Crooks is an old man. He's not allowed to do anyway. He stays on the ranch all the time. He can't go to town with the rest of the guys. All of that is off limits to him. So what does he do? He reads books. So he's an old man. He's been there for years. What does he do with his money? He can't go and gamble with the guys or go to the other places they can go. So naturally he would read books. That's logical. So he would have a library. In my mind, those walls would be lined with books. Now, Crooks know that he's a stereotype. And they only have one there, to reflect off of, and they have attitudes toward him because they use the N-word all the time, behind his back. It's in the play. And yet Steinbeck is showing you this guy is smart. He's crippled, but he's athletic. He's a better athlete than all the guys on the ranch. And he's smarter than all the guys. He reads all the time. But in my mind, in the set, he would have burlap bag hiding books on the wall in case somebody comes by the barn. He didn't want to take a chance of them knowing that he reads. All of this is clear to me. And then when this guy comes in, when Lenny comes in, that's how I grew up. I grew up around people like Lenny. I lived on the school campus with, where I talked about it in the first part, all these people with these different disabilities and handicaps and physical and mental and that kind of a thing, and how fascinating they were. And in Of Mice and Men, Crooks bonds with this guy, and in the play, it's a great deal of tension. He upsets the guy and fears for his life at one point, but that's all resolved. And basically they bond. And in that scene just there's so many messages in that scene. It's about saying, here's a black guy who's crippled, athletic, and smart, and he makes adjustments according to what the situation is. And during the scene, he tells about his background. For crying out loud, he has something in common with the boss on the ranch. His father had a ranch. So that's a whole different dimension to Crooks. All that should be brought out. This man here, father owned a ranch. He had two brothers. They slept in the same bed. Now he's living in a corner in a barn. He's an old man. How does he survive all that? And I think about where I grew up, how all the adjustments people have to make with what they got. Whatever they got, they take that. And they do something with it. And here's this man living in this corner of this barn, smelling, the horse's dung and everything every day. At some point, I guess he has to get used to it. But yet, he expands his mind. He reads all the time. I could go on that, But that's, anyway, yeah, that's the one character. The other character, the role I played in August Wilson's The Piano Lesson. Now here's where you have the contrast, the comparison with August Wilson and John Steinbeck. Now, as I said, Steinbeck took the stereotype head on. I've talked about that. So August does the same thing in The Piano Lesson. He hits the stereotype head on. But in addition to that, August tried to reconnect black people to their culture. He's saying, in essence, you live in America, where the dominant culture is European. But that is not your background. You didn't come from Europe. You came from Africa. And he saw the effect, not only slavery, but the attitude about Africa, the place, where people run around in the jungle, and the people who in America are compared to the animals in Africa. Here again, you got the animal in the human comparison. The monkey eating the bananas and that kind of a thing. And he realized, August Wilson realized, that too many of us internalized that. And so you get angry and very upset, and you're extremely sensitive about someone associating you with Africa. So in reading August Wilson took me back to as a child when I was growing up. And here again, I always kind of go into all these stories. I'm trying to get this in, but I think this is essential to what I'm talking about. And I mentioned in part one about how when I first came off my father's campus and stepped into that other world, It was totally different from living on these big campuses where I lived. And everywhere we lived, the campus is flat. But I noticed, and let me say this too, in the Mississippi Delta, everything is flat. I mean, I lived in Jonestown, everything is flat. The campus is flat, all the surrounding areas flat. Kahoma, the next place, everything is flat. But in Harnett, I guess it was moving toward the hills where I was when I was a kid. I didn't see any hills. But when we got to Winona, the first thing I noticed was this big campus we were on, and you look to the east, and there's this high hill and a little mom and pop store about, I'd say maybe even a quarter of a mile, maybe even a half a mile away. But it was sitting right up on this hill. I was fascinated by that, the landscape. And then when I, had to go all the way across town to the public school, the landscape. This is not flat. This is hilly. The streets would go up and down and up and down. And that little town was sitting kind of on a hill, but you couldn't tell when you were in town unless you walked right in Midtown, and there was this one street that ended on each side of downtown. And right on this street, at the end of this street, was a place called Blue Front. And this is where all of the black businesses were located, right on the side of this steep hill. I mean, the steepest hill I'd ever seen. As a matter of fact, you don't drive up that hill in a car unless you're a very skillful driver. Because if you stop at the top, you'd better know how to, at the days you had stick shift, you had to know how to, shift gear and not go down the hill halfway to turn. That was a challenge to everybody in that town. I was fascinated by that. And just how the streets were laid out in this blue front where the black businesses were. And they had the sidewalks level to go into the business, but the street was coming down like that. It was really something to see. And I was fascinated by this, the landscape. And then I go to, going through town and seeing the, white only, colored only, and I'm thinking, colored, okay, I never thought about color before, because then I said, oh, that's right, all of the kids on the campus, they're all different colors. So, okay, color, different colors. It ranged from what you call very dark to very light, the range of colors. And then they had, in downtown, the sign says white only and colored only on these doors. So I get to the public school, and this is a whole different world. I mean, I'd never heard these kids talking about color. They had they had every category of color down to a fine art. I said, what is this? I mean, you hear jet black, black, dark brown, brown, light brown, light, yellow, red, high yellow. Now, high yellow was that was when you're close to what they call white. So if you look almost white, you were high yellow. And interesting about this was serious stuff at the black school. I mean, serious stuff. I mean, and you notice that if you were jet black, then you fit into a category that everybody noticed if you were jet black, because there were very few people that were jet black. But then being black was a little different from being jet black. And I noticed that people could communicate based upon their color. If you were, say, jet black, another jet black person could say anything they wanted to you about color, could tease you about your color. They could perform games about their color, but you had to be that color in order to play that game. Now, they might let a black person play the jet black game, or a dark person, or say a dark brown, but you better be careful. You might be able to play that game if you're dark brown, but that's about it. That's the cutoff line. If you're brown and you say something about that color, you would better be ready for a fight. And once you get past brown, you get the light brown to light to a high yellow, forget it. Forget it. Forget it. You don't say anything about color, period. Period. Because, especially depending on the category of color, if you say something about that color, you might lose your front teeth. And that was real. So I had to learn all these things just, but I'm a keen observer. I'm quiet. I don't mingle too easily. So I just watch and I pick up how people interact among themselves. And I says, whoa. I come off the campus where none of this stuff existed on the campus where I work. Everybody was just another human being with their own issues, and I'd hear singing all through the day. Little groups of kids get together and they'd sing songs. Maybe one kid would be blind, one would be crippled, and one would be, could move a little bit, and one couldn't move at all. They had to bring him and set him there at the spot where they would gather, and they would talk and sing all day long. But in this public school, whoa, this was a whole new education for me. Kids, into color, so that, there could be fights and that kind of thing, and I'm thinking, now it says colored high school. That's what the school was, colored high school. In the other school, the kids, they said, that's the white school, but it was just called the one on a high school. It didn't have white on it. They said, but the kids said, that's the white school. And I'm thinking, well, I guess they all look about the same color. I'm thinking, I think white is a color, No, I said, you go through downtown and it says white only, colored only. I thought all people had a color, but, that's why I say this color thing is it's kind of confusing to me and kind of funny. But anyway, then I'm here watching these kids, maybe if a dark brown person says something to a black person, he's got his dukes up. You got to apologize or something. You got to clean this up. But if he was a little lighter and said the same thing, it was you got to apologize. That was the thing. And I'm thinking, I wonder what do they do over there at that white school? Do they go out on the campus, and somebody, what would they say? Would they play games about each other's color? I said, maybe not. I said, maybe color is not there. That's one of the things I do. And what point was I making?
Well, you were talking about the play.
Right.
About the piano lesson.
Ah, yeah.
And this had to do with how August Wilson was handling stereotypes.
Thank you. That's what I do. I get to talking and say, now what point was I trying to make? Right. Okay, I wanted to make one more point there before I go to how August dealt with that. This one kid was, I guess he was close to jet black. He may have been black. I don't. Somebody told me I'm not very good at colors. I heard a black person tell me, said, "Oh, Danny, you don't even know a color when you see it." But anyway, he was dark. He was very dark, and this girl who was light. As a matter of fact, I was playing with him, and she came up and said, "Your mother is an African." That's all she said. And it was a brick bat near him, and he picked that brick bat up, and it's almost like I could read his mind. And when he came up with that brick bat, he realized that he idolized that girl's brother, and he was a bigger guy. I could almost see him thinking, and his hand came up to hit that girl with that brick. I could see his mind saying, I can't hit her because I idolize her brother, and if I hit her, I'll lose my idol. I could almost tell that's what he was thinking. Because he stopped like that and looked at her and just broke down and cried like a baby. And I said, my God, all she said was, your mother is an African. And he was ready to bash her head in with a brick. And then the only thing stopped him is that she happened to be the sister of the guy that he idolized. And so that August Wilson, which to me was so incredible about him, he never lived in Mississippi. He grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he wrote this play that I'm in was about the Mississippi Delta where I was born. And in that play, it dealt with, the piano lesson is about connections to your African roots. That's what the whole lesson is about in that play. About how these people survived slavery and how they dealt with, the whole issue of slavery, and their ancestors were carved on that piano. And August was basically what he's trying to say is, this is real. This is where you came from. You shouldn't be out fighting one another about someone saying, basically, in essence, your roots are African. Don't be ashamed of that. Embrace that. That's what the message August was giving. And on this stereotype, too, in this play, he dealt with the stereotype where Steinbeck, had took Crooks and dealt with all the stereotypes. August Wilson took this little girl, not a little girl, she was a young lady. She had a small scene in the play, but an essential, crucial scene in the play that he felt passionate about. I mean, he felt passionate about this one character, because people have a tendency to fall into stereotypes. In this scene, she comes into the setting, has been picked up at a bar by the lead character. And so it seems that fact that she was picked up at a bar and brought to a strange house, the interpreters of the role want to say, oh, she's just another whore. She was picked up at a bar by a stranger and went to a strange house. Nothing happened at the house, but the implication is that's why she came there. August was trying to make a powerful statement. And if you read the play very closely, and he would say that very passionately, she's a sweet girl. She's a sweet girl. So you can't skim over the play. You have to delve into the depth of the character. You have to delve into the subtext. And the subtext, what August was trying to say about this young girl who was picked up at this bar, was she was lonely. She was out on her own, and she had a boyfriend that she cared a great deal about, and he had walked out. In her pain, she just went to a public place, and that's all it was about. She was a sweet girl who went to a bar, not because she wanted to, engage in the life of prostitution, but that was how she got in that situation. And in the play, it's like she realizes once she comes on, and that's what he wanted the person playing the character to realize. It's like, oh my God, what have I gotten into? I just wanted to, basically, that the whole subtext is, I was lonely. I didn't know this is what could happen, And so her thing was, how do I get out of this? That's what he wanted the character to play. I'm in a strange house with a strange man, and he wants something I can't give him. So how do I use my wit to get out of this situation? That's what he wanted to be played. I picked it up by just watching him and seeing how he would react if you didn't go to that depth. He took it very personal if you didn't go to that depth. And then I realized then, if we don't do that, if we don't become so informed about what a playwright is trying to say, we're doing that playwright a disservice. We're doing the audience a disservice. We're doing art a disservice. Because those great writers, they're trying to say, hey, we can go beneath the surface. We can understand one another. There's a possibility of us communicating. Cultures can fuse. Two parallel universes can interact. It can happen. And you don't have to reject your culture. You don't have to reject your culture. You can keep your culture and accept mine. I can keep my culture and accept yours. That kind of went through August Wilson's plays. He wrote a cycle of 10 plays. Deep, fantastic stuff, almost Shakespearean. Well, I would say Shakespearean to an extent, because Shakespeare did that in Othello. Othello here was a soldier who was hired to protect the town, and in the meantime, he married this guy's daughter, and he took him up before the magistrates and says he used witchcraft on my daughter. So he had to defend himself of the charge of using witchcraft before he'd go out and defend the country. So I'll stop at that point on that note.
It seems like August Wilson has been pretty important. pretty important to you throughout your career. I'm wondering, we've got some of the early stories, but how did that relationship develop? You ran into him a lot over the years.
The first time that I saw August Wilson was, I think it was late 1979. I was in rehearsals at a play at Penumbra Theater here in St. Paul, and there was a break in the action during the rehearsals, and I looked out and he was this striking man sitting in the audience. This was a love scene that I was rehearsing, and my first thought was, is that this lady's husband? Is he what Shakespeare describes as, is he a judicious spectator? Excuse me, Shakespeare categorized audiences as, you have the groundlings, the people who had the cheapest seats way back, and then you had the unskilled, and then you had the judicious, and then you had the barren spectator. And so I'm wondering, which category does he fall in? If he's not a judicious spectator, he might not understand that, what the art of acting is all about. But I found out that later that was August Wilson. Then he was had just come to the city, and I found out later, how he got here, which was a whole story in itself. And he started writing plays. He was a poet in Pittsburgh. And one of my favorite directors had coached him into coming to the Twin Cities to become a playwright. Sent him an airplane ticket. And that was shortly after that when I saw him. And speaking of, let me say this about August Wilson. After he'd written 8 plays, he wrote 10 plays, 9 of them went to Broadway, and they were all about the decades of the 20th century. When he wrote 8 plays, then he wrote an article in the New York Times, and he talked about that. All he had left were the bookends. Decade 1, 1900 to 1910, and 1990 to 2000. Those are 2 plays that he hadn't written. But in this article that he wrote to the New York Times, he talked about, in 1975, he wrote a short story. And the title of the short story was The Greatest Blues Singer in the World. And the story began, Balboa was walking the street of his own private ocean, and Balboa was drowning. The end. And when I saw that, I said, oh, this is deep. I've got to study this. And I studied that short story, which was about 1 sentence, which is the way August talked to me throughout our relationship. He'd always talk to me in 1 lines, basically. And when I read that, I said, oh, wow. And that's what he was addressing himself to. He was addressing himself to that young man who picked up that brickbat. He was addressing himself to the people who felt ashamed of their origin, because they had internalized. It became their own private ocean, and they were drowning in their private ocean. And I know, the blues is very popular music, and that's what it is, the blues. And he's basically saying, that this. You have to be careful about how much you let that blues become your own private ocean, because you will drown in it. And his whole play was to try to say, don't drown. I mean, his whole work was, don't drown in your own private ocean. Take charge of your life and reconnect with your culture. But I was going to say that August Wilson had such an impact on me. His first play that made it to Broadway was Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which I did eventually. But at the time when they had Ma Rainey's Black Bottom on Broadway, we did the first show that he had written in the cycle, Jitney. All of these shows, the settings were in Pittsburgh, but Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, the setting was in Chicago. But at the time that Ma Rainey's Black Bottom was on Broadway, we were opening at Penumbra Theater in St. Paul, a Jitney. And that's the first time I had a chance to actually talk to August, because when I went to the cast party, he came up to me when I walked in and says, Danny, says, can you drop me off at Sweeney's, which is a place where he wrote, a cafe in St. Paul. He says, will you drop me off there when you're ready to go? And I said, sure. And so when I got ready to go, I went and got it, because I didn't stay long. And he got in the car and he says, Danny, he says, his play was on Broadway. He says, the critics in New York are wondering if I'm one of these one-shot black playwrights. He says, Danny, I'm going to keep writing. And I thought about that when he kept churning out those plays. And that was 1984. And had I gone over that sequence of how I got my break in Chicago, had I gone over that already?
I think it's worth telling. It's worth telling. If you did, tell it again.
Okay. This was 1984, and I'm trying to think. Oh, yes, I think that night, that opening night of that play, August, the play was on Broadway, but he was, had come back home. Every night of that entire run, August was sitting up in the light booth watching that play, Jitney. And if an actor would say a line wrong, do anything like that, he really didn't want you to paraphrase his work. He would be in the lobby waiting on you. And I remember this one night, I came out and this other actor was right ahead of me, and he just looked at him and says, there are no honkies in Pittsburgh. And I knew that this guy must have said this on stage and it wasn't in the play. And this guy was much taller than August, and by the time he got to apologizing, he was almost looking up at August. But I said, it was a powerful thing how he just said that he talked in those one-liners, but had great impact. So I knew from that, because I'm respectful of an actor's, of a writer's work, so I try to, say it exactly the way it's written, but some actors are kind of careless with the words. You could enrage him by being careless with his work. And so I didn't forget that. And it's 1989, actually, 5 years later, that's when I got my break. I had done 12 years in the community theater until I got my equity card, and I was doing 8 years here as a professional actor. And in 1989, I got a call, and it was from the Goodman Theater in Chicago, saying we were putting on a pre-Broadway production of August Wilson's called The Piano Lesson, and one of the actors, we need an understudy, and would you be available? And my thing was, yes, can you play a piano? I says, yes, but I can't read music. That's okay. Can you play the blues? Yes. Well, we'll get back to you in about 3 hours. So I started thinking, well, what can I play? And I said, oh, you know what? I says, I don't really play the blues on the piano. I says, I played a little on the guitar. Oh boy! So I jumped to the piano and says, let me see if I can get something together, and in case they do call back. So I said, okay, I have it all worked out. I think I can use a blues song on the piano during the audition. The phone rang 3 hours later, and they said, we want you as a replacement. So wow, this is an upgrade. But you're going to work against someone. We have another person auditioning also. So I hopped a plane to Chicago, and of course I was nervous. I was in the lobby waiting for them to call me in, and in walked August Wilson, and he walked up to me and says, they said someone was coming from Minnesota to audition. I didn't know it was you. And walked on. And then another fellow came in, and so I says, and I knew he was my competition. So I said, are you a professional piano player? He said, yes. I said, oh boy. He says, but I can't act. So I knew then that, hey, I'm on even ground. And he went in first, and he made that piano sing like a bird. He could play that piano. But I was okay. I says, I can act. When they called me in, I I did my piece. I did a piece from Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. I had done it in 1987. This was 1989. And when I finished, the director says, and played my song on the piano, he says, "Can you play the blues?" I said, "Oh my God." I said, "Blues? Gospel?" And they said, "Thank you." And I was gone. And headed toward the door. Two people came running. "Wait, wait, 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 wait. We want you now, you now." And one of the people was the casting director. And she was tickled. She says, when the director asks you that question, "Can you play the blues?" is August leaned forward and said, "That is the blues." She said that was so funny. So that's when I got my break in Chicago, when I was cast as. And during that time in Chicago, the pressure was so intense, and I had so little time to prepare. I couldn't memorize my lines. I couldn't get anything. I was just had a total collapse, a mental block. And I was walking down the side hall one day and met August, and he was walking straight toward me, like he always does, and say his one-liners. He never stopped walking. He says, "When I'm writing, I hear a song." They hit me like a thunderbolt, and I went back to my hotel that night, and I says, "Whoa, let's see if I can hear that song," and I did. I started reading the script, and I heard that song. I heard the rhythm of the Delta blues, the music, and those lines started coming to me, and when I got those lines, I had my character and my movement and everything right in those blues. And so every play that I read of August, I'm looking for that song, because he feels, that we all have a song to sing, and that's how he wrote his plays.
So he was responsible for you getting hired for your first big acting thing, and you played that role over 300 times. So did he show up again in your career? I mean, were there other appearances of August Wilson as your career progressed?
When I was done in Chicago, I thought, well, that's it. The show was a pre-Broadway show, and they were still going to different places across the country. They were leaving there, going to San Diego, but they didn't offer me anything, so I came on back home, and I got a call from Iowa to go down there and do a couple of shows from a guy I had worked for before. I had done the same show for him back in 1970 that I had done for Warren Frost, my favorite director, and that was Tom Johnson from the University of Iowa in Ames. He was a professor there at the time and doing the same show that I had done at Theater in the Round, Slow Dance on the Killing Ground. So he called me in 1989 to come down and do. He had left the university and had his own theater. And while I was down there, I got a call to rejoin the piano lesson for the Kennedy Center production. The same guy replaced in Chicago was not going to be able to come to the show and do the Kennedy Center, so I had to come in a week late. So they let me do that so I could finish up in Iowa, and then that's when I met August Wilson again. They were rehearsing at Yale University. We were living in a hotel right off the campus and rehearsing on the campus. And one day, I believe it was the first day that I was there during break, he came up to me and he says, the show, one of his previous shows at that point, Fences, had been on Broadway and had won a Pulitzer Prize. And he came up and he says, and he was telling me about James Earl Jones, who played the lead role in Fences on Broadway. He says, "Danny," he says, in the rehearsals, when they were rehearsing Fences, James Earl Jones wouldn't go on break. When they called break, so he'd go and sit down and look at the script. Said he was trying to get, he didn't say song, he said my rhythm. He said I admired that he wouldn't take a break. He wanted to get the rhythm that I write in. And then he walked away, August. And then one day while I was at the hotel where I was living, I was sitting at the table, and I saw him coming straight toward me, and he just sat across me at my table. And he says, he let me know they had let a couple of people go who had been in the show in Chicago. And one was this young lady. And he let me know that one was paraphrasing his lines and the other was playing my role like a whore. And every time he would say those things to me, it would leave such an impact on me. So just hearing him say those one-liners to me from the time I first met him practically until end of the career, it caused me to really appreciate more the playwright and my responsibility to them. Then reading Shakespeare, he had the same feeling. That's what August Wilson and Shakespeare had in common. They carried a pain to see their work disrespected by actors. And Shakespeare felt so strongly about that, he put that in Hamlet. They said the greatest, arguably the greatest play that's ever been written, Hamlet. He has Hamlet hiring some actors to do a play to try to catch his new father, who was his uncle and married his mother and had killed his father. At least the ghost of his father came back and told him, you know, my brother killed me, so get revenge. And Hamlet thought he could get to the conscience of the king by putting on a play. And right in Hamlet, he's telling them the different categories of spectators and who to appeal to. And he's saying in that thing, in my own words, he's saying, if there are a whole theater of people, and there's one judicious spectator, you do that play for that one person. Because they know how it's supposed to be done, and that's your obligation. Don't get sucked into the unskillful spectators, or the barren spectators, or the groundlings, but you play to the judicious spectator. And that, I says, wow. Shakespeare, August Wilson, Steinbeck, I saw the connection. I said, oh, that's why these plays are so outstanding, because they address so many issues. And we were in California. Before we went to Broadway, I was in California. That was after Kennedy Center. We went to Doolittle Theater in LA on Hollywood and Vine. And they were selling calendars, 1991, I believe, calendars. And I opened the calendar, and there was these great writers, black writers. Toni Morrison was in there, Langston Hughes, and Richard Wright, people down the line, and August Wilson. And August Wilson was still there. So I turned the calendar to the month where his picture was above the days, and approached him and says, Augustus, will you sign this? And he and handed it back to me. And I looked at it and I says, whoa. It said, Danny, life equals art equals us. And that gives me chills right now. And what he was saying is, tell me about my responsibility to be true, because we are depicting life. Same thing Shakespeare said, hold a mirror up to nature, show virtue her feature, scorn her own image. And that's what those great playwrights are doing. They're saying we can learn how to appreciate what life is really all about. We can cut through these stereotypes. We can cut through all these things that we unnecessarily burden ourselves down with. A kind of life that I had lived on my father's campus before I stepped out into the other world. People with all kinds of disabilities and challenges they had to deal with, not overcome, but deal with. And you get out in the real world, and people create all of these, that's a contradiction, false realities. But people live by things. It has no basis in reality, no basis in logic, no basis in common sense. And that's what August is saying. We're trying to help you to cut through all these things. We're trying to help people deal with who they are, where they came from, embrace it, and not get caught up in someone else's definition of who we are. And how are we on time? Uh, this whole thing about stereotyping, which I noticed the great writers address head on. This took me back to when I was in the 7th grade. My teacher, I loved him, wonderful man. He had a camaraderie with the students that was just unmatchable. And he told this story that I'll never forget. He called it suggestibility. He says suggestibility is when, for example, say there was this minister and this drunk were walking down the street having a conversation. And he looked up and there was this sign over this establishment that says bar and restaurant. And it was in the morning and a man was going in. And the preacher says, I see the gentleman is going in for breakfast. And the drunk says, no, he's going in there to the bar to get drunk. And the teacher was saying basically when you make a judgment about another person, that's biblical. You're making a judgment about yourself. I never forgot that. The drunk said he was going to get drunk. The minister said he was going to eat. So he was telling his class, telling the class, when you say what another person is going to do or who they are and you don't know anything about them, you're really defining yourself. And so I said, oh, wow, all of these things kind of tie in, you know. The great classic, you know, which people used to say, read Shakespeare and the Bible, you get great lessons from both. And I see those parallels and how those things interconnect. The Bible says, judge not, and the great writer says, avoid stereotypes, because things are not what they seem. You just look at the surface. Beneath Crooks was a smart, brilliant man. And beneath the girl coming into the, picked up at the bar was a sweet girl who just was lonely and got caught up in a bad situation and had to use her wits to get out of it. And in Othello, it says, come on now, you're bothering the man about this triviality, saying he used witchcraft to lure this young girl, and our country is in danger of being overrun. And Shakespeare was trying to say, come on, don't get caught up in these silly things, you know. There are other things much more significant.